Thank you, Cynthia, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak this morning. Really, really happy to be here. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and primarily because the economic implications of it are enormous. There we go. Yep, I got it. Yep, great. Okay, so Lauren gave a really comprehensive presentation that obsoletes some of what I had to talk about, but I'll piggyback off of some other stuff. The great part of that is that my talk may be a little shorter, giving you more time for Q&A. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where does the AV path lead. Lauren talked about nightmare versus utopia. I'm very much, I think the economics push very much towards utopia, but government policy, as Lauren mentioned, is going to be really, really important to making sure that we go that way. I'm going to talk a little bit about the transition, then talk about policy and planning issues, kind of focusing on some of the economics of this. Right. So as Lauren mentioned, there are about a bajillion estimates of how long the transition to primarily fully autonomous vehicles are going to be. I think the estimate that you put out was about 6 years. Is that right? Yeah, more estimates that I've seen are really on the conservative side, and there's this one by McKinsey that suggests that it won't be primarily fully autonomous until about 2050, and that's about a 30-year transition period. I don't think that estimate makes any sense at all, but I think that estimate is really highly geographically dependent. And I'll talk more about this in a minute, and that's really important for planners to be aware of. So what's the future going to look like? And this is Lauren's utopia. I really believe that we're going to end up in utopia, and we're going to end up there in a hurry. Just a side note on the transition. I'll probably forget to mention it later, so I'll mention it now. Or if you go back to 1909, in New York City, there were primarily horse-drawn carriages on the streets. If you get a picture of Broadway in New York City, you're going to see horse-drawn carriages in 1909. If you look at 1919, same picture, same street, it's filled with automobiles. Right? So the transition from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles took 10 years. Right, and I'll make the case that is a much longer transition period that we might expect in places like San Francisco, because there's a dividend, right, to making the change. Whereas going from horse-drawn carriages to automobile, you had to buy something. Right, so there was a cost impediment. But I'll get more to that later. So vehicle ownership, I think, will be very limited. Private ownership will be those with specialized vehicle needs. Think construction workers, people who have to haul around large amounts of material or equipment with them on a daily basis. Fleet ownership will serve everybody else. It's going to be Google, Uber, Lyft, Apple, GM. I don't know who it's going to be. But we will not own cars. We will own smartphones that will summon them, and they will be everywhere. My prediction is that they will be largely electric. Right, that prediction, I think, follows on the fact that they will be largely fleet-driven and not independently owned, because the economics really point towards an electric vehicle over the long term. Insurance, there's lots of hullabaloo about, what's going to happen in the insurance industry. Well, I think it's going to just all change to product liability. Right? Either we're going to have Uber, Google, and Lyft, et cetera, owning their own insurance, or the people who produce the cars are going to have product liability insurance. I think that it will be product liability. And again, policy is going to help bring about this outcome. It's not clear when we're going to get there. I think 2030 probably for widespread adoption in the Bay Area. What's it going to look like? It's going to look like this. All right, we're going to have, teeny tiny little Google-like cars. When you want to go up to Tahoe over the weekend, you're going to summon a car like the one in the upper right. If you're commuting with somebody, you can have a meeting in your car. You can turn the front seat around. You can stick your hands up through the sunroof if you want to. Right? So it's going to be a much better driving world. The transition, in the short term, I think that adaptive cruise control, and maybe the other panelists will have something to say about this. I think adaptive cruise control is really the low-hanging fruit. And I would like to see policy push that much faster. Because you think about the implications for the highways. If we can get many, many more cars out on the highway with adaptive cruise control, then in a very short period of time, we can speed the flow of traffic. Medium term, we're going to have lots more of these, more bells and whistles that are leading towards towards autonomous, making it into cars that people buy at the same time that the private fleets are going to be coming online. So there's going to be a lot of overlap there as people realize that, wow, this car that I bought, that's really expensive. Over the long term, again, personal vehicle ownership largely going to be a thing of the past. So the economics of transition. It's going to be really, really difficult. For individuals in their car decisions, that's not going to be so hard. But it's really going to fundamentally change the economy. There are lots of estimates about job displacement, estimates from 5 million people, which I think limits the analysis to those who currently drive trucks, buses, cars, what have you. And all of those jobs will go away. If you expand that to think about all of the services that help service the private vehicle, gas stations, vehicle repair, and body shops, right? Those are all going to go away too. Why are they going to go away? Because Google, Uber, Lyft, they're going to have their own service, their own repair shop, their own body shop. Body shops, even if they're independently owned, there are going to be far fewer of them because we're not going to have accidents. Right, all those accidents will go away. Police and fire, they don't have to respond to accidents. They don't have to monitor speed on the highways. Healthcare workers, I'll mention in a minute, right? There are an enormous number of people that are injured and taken to an emergency room because of the automotive accidents. That might not be a really big implication, but I put that up there primarily to note that there's going to be job loss in places that we haven't really thought of. The implications of autonomous vehicles are really, really broad. Think about the automotive industry. Right, there are going to be far fewer cars if we're all sharing them. So the people employed in manufacturing, there's going to be more job loss in manufacturing. Municipal finances, Lauren mentioned this, revenues are going to go up, revenues are going to go down, right? They're going to go down. Parking revenue, speeding tickets, traffic violation revenues, parking tickets. They're going to go up because a lot of the parking spaces will go away. That will lead, you think about a big parking ramp, it'll go away. Maybe we get a 50-story commercial building. Going to be more commercial, going to be more retail, going to be more residential. If people aren't spending money on their cars, they'll be spending it on other things. Be less spending on road maintenance and development. I will argue. So the economics, again, is going to drive the transition. The dividend that I've mentioned, right? Eliminate car ownership, right? You're sitting there and you're making the decision, well, do I want to go fully autonomous? Do I want to let Uber and Lyft do all of my driving for me? Or do I want to spend $8,600 a year to maintain a private vehicle? Well, that $8,600 a year is going to buy you an awful lot of rides on Uber and Lyft, partly because the cost per mile. And the cost of Uber and Lyft is going to go dramatically. Cost per mile is estimated to go down from 59 cents down to about 19 cents, right? So the cost of transportation is going to go down dramatically. Repurpose your garage, right? So I wrote this and submitted my presentation. I did a little bit more analysis on the value of adding another bedroom to your house. Right, San Mateo County is the county where the value of adding another bedroom to your house is the most significant. And this just shocked me, but looking at a boatload of data from Zillow, adding another bedroom adds about $200,000 to the value of your house. Now, most are sort of in this $50,000 to $100,000 range. If you go up to Yuba County, it's more like $15,000 to $20,000 for an extra bedroom. So there is a dividend, right? You add a bedroom, sell the house, you're going to get $50,000 to maybe $200,000 in your pocket. I'm going to get rid of the car. You get rid of the driveway. You have more space for your kids to play. Time recovery. Lauren talked about this, right? 50% of the Bay Area workforce has a commute in excess of 30 minutes. Right? If I have a commute more than 30 minutes, would I be really happy to switch to a vehicle that I don't have to pay attention to? I can sit and ride and get something done. I'm going to switch. So it's also going to become, as more and more autonomous vehicles get adopted, they're going to be really annoying to try and drive around. I mean, I like to drive, and people who are following the letter of the law, I guess I'll admit this publicly, they're very frustrating. Well, the autonomous vehicles are probably going to follow the law pretty closely. Economics drives transition from a public perspective. Right, the public benefits of making this transition, I argue, are enormous. Right, estimates of the savings, just the economic savings, range from about 0.8 trillion, that's with a TR, not a B or an M, a TR, to 1.3 trillion. Right, 1.3 trillion, now you're talking about half the size of the California economy in a given year. Right, and this is per year. This is not just the transition benefits. This is every single year. Accidents drive about 25% of congestion. Imagine if congestion were immediately reduced by about 25%. I honestly think that they're going to reduce congestion a lot more than that. The implication of that is that we are way over capacity in terms of our highways right now, so we don't have to build anymore. 32,000, I was talking to Ryan earlier, he said the estimates are about 40,000, right? So, 32,000 to 40,000 deaths per year because people drive, and 90% of those are because of human negligence. All right, so if we can get rid of all that death, that's an enormous savings. The value of saving a life is pretty high. 2 million injuries result from automobile accidents in every year, right? So the social or the public value of making this transition is absolutely enormous. Where do the savings come from? 0.8 trillion to 1.3 trillion. The 0.8 largely eliminates an estimate of the cost of accidents, so that's about $480 billion. Increased productivity is about $507 billion, right? So here you can see where the benefits from making the transition come. So public policy and planning issues, I'm going to argue very vigorously that active and proactive policy is essential. Right? The government must encourage progress because of these social costs. It must also encourage progress because it wants to dictate whether we end up in a nightmare or a utopia. It's going to be really difficult. I mean, I've talked to many people that say, from a policy perspective, we don't want to push this, we don't want to touch this because of the displacement issue. Right? Show me a policymaker, an elected official who wants to pursue a technology that's going to displace between 5 and 10 million people. Right? Really, really hard, but essential for government participation. Important transitional issues. What infrastructure should be developed? Right? Are we headed down a right path, a path that's consistent with autonomous vehicles? What to do about public transportation? There's a public transportation authority in Florida that wanted to extend its service on a line. They looked at the cost of buying more buses and hiring more people, and they decided instead to contract with Lyft. Right? So now Lyft provides dedicated service to expand public transportation. There are going to be lots of synergies. I don't pretend to stand up here and know what they are, but it's going to be really fascinating to see how it plays out. What do we do with all the parking spaces? Well, I argue that we're going to get rid of the vast majority of them. Right? Because think about, if those cars are always going to be driving around. Yes, we're going to need places where they can drop people off. But the amount of space, and I'll show you in just a minute, for that is much, much less than what we're currently mandating. Right, so planning, right, we need to respond to the coming changes. The planning horizon, I argue, for any investment has gotten much, much shorter. Right, transportation infrastructure planning based on today's predominant technology is a non-starter. Is absolutely the wrong way to approach planning, and we need to encourage the changes to happen more quickly in terms of mobility, safety, productivity, environmental concerns. They all demand fast action. Responding to the coming changes, I'll argue that every geography needs its own estimate of how long the transition is going to take. I've been doing some modeling in this regard, so that's slightly self-serving, but I think that it's also very, very true. Right? So my modeling suggests that in San Mateo County, where the benefit of adding another bedroom and commutes are pretty high, transition from when they become available to 100% transition is going to be about 8.8 years. San Francisco, where there's also an enormous benefit to that extra bedroom and commutes are pretty high, going to be about 10.5 years. In Marin, my estimate is that it's going to be about 14 years. Right? So adoption is going to vary very substantially. If you're going out to Fresno, what was the number for Fresno? I think the number for Fresno was something like 25 years. You go up to Yuba County, the estimate is really close to 30 years. And that's all based on the notion that the longest transition is going to be 30 years, which McKinsey suggested. And I think that that's too long. And if you shorten that length, you're also going to shorten the planning horizon for everybody else. Right, so encouraging change, mobility and equity considerations, right? A lot of low-income workers now commute in ways that aren't standard, so public transportation doesn't serve them very well. Well, if we're in utopia and there are car share services, and they are as cheap as I think that they'll be, that will be very, very good for low-wage workers. The elderly and the disabled, the opportunities for mobility, increased mobility for that's not incorporated in the $1.3 trillion, but those are social benefits that need to be measured, and they're very significant. Safety, the only way to reduce traffic fatalities is by coordinated effort to make sure this happens and happens fast. Productivity, reduced congestion, people will get where they're going faster and they'll be productive on the way there. Environment, the impact on emissions is ambiguous. The impact on VMT is certainly ambiguous. Going to be interesting to see how that plays out, but I'm pretty optimistic that the implications for the environment will nonetheless be very positive. And these are all societal benefits that need to be pushed. Right, so safety and productivity, let's talk about that for just a second. Right, so what's going to happen with autonomous vehicles, safety and productivity? Well, what it's going to do is it's going to turn somebody's day from looking like this to looking like that. Right, and that's just a much better world. From an environmental perspective, right, think about now, how many of you go into San Francisco on a Friday or Saturday night for dinner, right? How long do you spend looking around for a parking space? I've spent a lot of time looking for a parking space. That's bad for the environment, it's bad for traffic. Getting in and out of parking spaces is bad for congestion, right? So much of that is going to go away. If you think about planning restrictions now, right? Planning requirements now. If you're going to put in a 2-bedroom apartment, right? Well, how much parking allocation do you have to give for that? And I think this image is from Seattle, right? So for a 2-bedroom apartment, you need 1.5 parking spaces, right? So you're allocating 50% again how much space you were for the apartment. So think about how many more apartments we could put if we didn't have to have the parking space. The church, right? There's a church for 400 people, right? With that church, you need an amount of parking that's 5x the size of the church, right? That goes away. You need a space where people can be dropped off. That might be the same size, it might be half the size of the church, but a lot of parking can just go away. And the way that I really like to think about this from an environmental perspective is that on this picture, you're going from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. This is really an opportunity to provide a lot of greening for big cities. If you look in the middle there, there's a space triangular that's half parking and half green space, right? Imagine if you could eliminate all of the surface parking in San Francisco. Imagine all of the green space that could be put in place. That would be wonderful for the environment and for the quality of life. Incentives through policy and planning. I really think, Lauren said this is highly controversial, but I think it's really, really important, and it's important to incentivize the move rather than penalize the lack of it. If you penalize, people are going to get upset. If you incentivize, then you're going to get a lot of action and people will be happy about it. Right? Allow vehicles equipped with adaptive cruise control into HOV lanes. Eventual conversion of HOV lanes to ACC and autonomous vehicle lanes. Allow ACC-equipped vehicles to simply go faster in the existing HOV lanes. Why? Well, that might require some change. I mean, if you're down in LA, there's limited opportunities to get into and out of the HOV lanes. Well, if we put that here, limited opportunities, then between those opportunities, an autonomous vehicle can go much faster if there aren't other vehicles in there. So these are things that will push in that direction. Subsidize ACC upgrades, right? Tremendous subsidization of electric vehicles. I think the same argument can be made for autonomous vehicles. ACC upgrades in particular are the low-hanging fruit. I think there are much better arguments to be made in this regard than for electric vehicles. Sort of in summary, the transition is coming, and I think it's coming very quickly. Most reports of how long the transition is going to take, I think, are extremely conservative, especially when you're thinking about places around like the Bay Area, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. Very important to start incorporating autonomous vehicles into planning now. I think that the rate of return, the horizon over which you're going to get some rate of return over most of the transportation planning that's in process now has gotten much, much shorter. Right, so it's going to be much harder to think about, in particular, adding more highway lane miles. This is my plea to all of the planning officials. Please add no more highway lane miles, because as soon as we have autonomous vehicles, we are way over capacity with highway lane miles that we have now. All right, so here is my contact information. My presentation will be up on my website later this afternoon, as well as TAM's. Please get in touch if you have any questions. I'll be more than happy to talk to you about it. Thank you very much.